From drug policy violations to possession of arms, these NBA players got into deep trouble. Here are some of the most scandalous NBA suspensions in history, starting with one of the most infamous suspensions in NBA history, Gilbert Arenas and his infamous gun in the locker room. The incident was a shock to fans and the NBA community, as it was the first time that a player had been suspended for gun-related charges. In 2010, Arenas and his teammate Javaris Crittenton had been involved in a dispute over a gambling debt. To settle their argument, Arenas brought several guns into the locker room as a form of intimidation. The incident was a major black eye for the NBA, as it raised serious questions about the culture of the league and the behavior of its players. On top of the suspension, Arenas pleaded guilty to a felony charge of carrying a pistol without a license and was sentenced to 2 years of probation. He also lost millions of dollars in salary and endorsement deals, and the incident effectively ended his career as a top-tier NBA player. But the scandals don't stop there. We've also got the case of Hedo Turkoglu. In 2013, Turkoglu, a veteran NBA player, was suspended for 20 games for violating the league's anti-drug policy. Specifically, Turkoglu tested positive for an anabolic steroid, which is a banned substance under the NBA's policy. Turkoglu, who was playing for the Orlando Magic at the time, initially denied any wrongdoing. He claimed that he had taken the steroid as part of a medical treatment for a shoulder injury. However, the NBA conducted an investigation and ultimately found that his explanation did not add up. The suspension was a significant blow to his career, as he was already at the peak of his playing days. Soon after the season ended, he retired from the NBA. Now let's talk about Jeff Taylor. In 2014, Jeff Taylor, a former player for the Charlotte Hornets, was suspended for 24 games in 2014 for violating the NBA's domestic violence policy. The suspension came after Taylor was charged with 2 counts of domestic assault and 1 count of malicious destruction of property following an incident with his girlfriend. The NBA launched an investigation into the incident and ultimately found that Taylor had engaged in conduct that was detrimental to the league. The suspension was a significant blow to Taylor's career, as he was a promising young player at the time. There are plenty of others that have shocked fans and left us scratching our heads. Remember when Latrell Sprewell choked his coach in 1997? He was suspended for 68 games and lost $6.4 million in salary. The story was that Sprewell became angry with Carlissimo during practice and grabbed him by the throat. Talk about anger issues. He continued choking him for several seconds before being restrained by other players. The incident shocked the basketball world and led to widespread condemnation of Sprewell's behavior. In response to the incident, the NBA launched an investigation and ultimately suspended Sprewell for the remainder of the season. The Warriors also terminated his contract, and he was subsequently traded to the New York Knicks. This had a huge impact on Sprewell's career and reputation. He became known as one of the most volatile and controversial players in the NBA and struggled to find success on the court in the years that followed. However, he did eventually earn a measure of redemption. He helped the Knicks to the NBA Finals in 1999 and earned multiple All-Star selections later in his career. How can we forget about Ron Artest, one of the key players in the Malice at the Palace incident? Artest was a player for the Indiana Pacers in 2004. He later changed his name to Metta World Peace when he was involved in one of the most infamous incidents in NBA history. During a game against the Detroit Pistons, Artest got into a heated altercation with Pistons player Ben Wallace. It would have been fine if it just ended there, but the fight quickly escalated into a full-blown brawl involving players, coaches, and fans. At one point, Artest laid down on the scorer's table to avoid the melee when a fan threw a cup of beer at him. Our star then charged into the stands and began fighting with fans, leading to a chaotic scene that took several minutes to bring under control. The incident led to the suspension of 9 players, including Artest, who was suspended for the remainder of the season, a total of 73 games. The suspension was one of the longest in NBA history. Moving on for Jody Meeks. While his suspension wasn't as long, it's still worth mentioning. In 2018, he was suspended for 25 games for violating the NBA's anti-drug program. The NBA didn't disclose the specific substance that Meeks tested positive for, of course, but the league has a strong policy on performance-enhancing drugs. These range from steroids and growth hormones to other performance-enhancing drugs. Meeks issued a statement following the suspension, apologizing to his teammates, fans, and the NBA for his actions. He also expressed regret for the impact that his suspension would have on his team and committed to working to regain the trust of his fans and colleagues. The suspension had a significant impact on Meeks' career, as it forced him to miss a substantial portion of the 2018 to 2019 season. He ultimately played in only 50 games that season and was subsequently released by the Washington Wizards. Now let's talk about Kermit Washington. Washington played in the NBA from 1973 to 1982 and in 1977, and during that time he managed to get himself a suspension worthy of this list. This took place during a game between the Los Angeles Lakers and the Houston Rockets. It started when Tomljanovic, who was running towards Washington in an attempt to break up a fight, was hit with a devastating punch that resulted in a fractured skull and facial injuries. Tomljanovic was hospitalized for several months and was forced to retire from basketball as a result of his injuries. Washington was suspended for 60 games, which at the time was the longest suspension in NBA history. He was also fined $10,000 and pleaded guilty to assault charges, which led to a sentence of 60 days in jail and 500 hours of community service. Moving on to Stephen Jackson. He was also a part of the Malice at the Palace incident, which included players such as Artest. The fight between Artest and Wallace spilled into the stands, where Jackson and other players became involved in a violent altercation with fans. Jackson was suspended for his role in the incident, which included throwing punches at fans and inciting further violence. He was also fined $1 million, which at the time was the largest fine ever levied against a player by the NBA. The suspension had a significant impact on Jackson's career, as it forced him to miss a substantial portion of the 2004 to 2005 season. He ultimately played in only 47 games that season and was subsequently traded to the Charlotte Bobcats. Last but not the least, we have O.J. Mayo. In 2016, Mayo was playing for the Milwaukee Bucks when he was suspended for 2 years for violating the NBA's drug policy. The suspension came after he tested positive for a banned substance. He later identified it as dihydroepiandrosterone, a hormone that can be used to boost athletic performance. Mayo later acknowledged his mistake and expressed regret for his actions. He stated that he had made a poor decision in trying to improve his performance and that he had let down his family, his teammates, and his fans. The suspension had a significant impact on Mayo's career, as it effectively ended his time in the NBA. He played briefly overseas in China and Puerto Rico, but was unable to secure a long-term contract with another NBA team. That's it for all these scandalous suspensions for today. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.
Middleton. So they're switching all over. Mayo for three, and he got it with a half a second to play.